You know what's funny? We mock ancient civilizations for worshiping golden calves and stone idols. But right now, at this very moment, you're probably one notification away from checking your phone like it's going to save your life. We've convinced ourselves we're evolved, enlightened, too smart to fall for the same traps that destroyed every empire before us. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to hear. We're not. We're doing the exact same thing, just with better graphics and faster internet. Look around. People are worshiping politicians like messiahs, algorithms like gods, and institutions that stopped serving truth decades ago. We've traded critical thinking for tribal thinking, reality for whatever makes us feel good, and freedom for the comfort of being told what to believe. And the worst part? Most people are choosing this, voluntarily handing over their minds, because independence is hard and the herd feels safe. But here's why you need to watch this until the end. Once you see what I'm about to show you, you can't unsee it. The patterns become obvious. The manipulation becomes transparent. And you'll finally understand why you felt like something's been deeply wrong even when everyone around you seems fine. This isn't going to be comfortable. Truth never is. But if you're tired of feeling like you're taking crazy pills while the world loses its mind, stick with me. And look, if this resonates with you, if you want more content that challenges the narrative instead of regurgitating it, hit that like button and subscribe. This channel only grows if people like you decide it's worth supporting. Now, let's talk about how civilizations collapse when they start worshiping false gods and why we're watching it happen in real time. Look, here's something most people don't want to hear. Modern idolatry isn't some new phenomenon we just stumbled into with smartphones and social media. It's the oldest trap in human history, and we're falling into it with the same blind enthusiasm our ancestors did. Every civilization that's ever collapsed did so because they traded truth for comfortable illusions. They built golden calves, worshipped emperors as gods, and convinced themselves that the shadows on the cave wall were reality itself. Plato saw it coming 24 centuries ago, and we're still too busy staring at our screens to notice we're chained in the exact same cave. The faces change, the technology evolves, but the fundamental human weakness? That stays the same. What makes this pattern so dangerous is that it feels so right when you're inside it. The Romans didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy themselves. They did it gradually, replacing virtue with spectacle, substance with entertainment, and critical thinking with whatever the mob was cheering for that week. Edward Gibbon spent years documenting how the mightiest empire in history ate itself from within, and the recipe was simple. Give people bread and circuses, let them worship comfort over character, and watch institutional decay do the rest. We like to think we're smarter than them, more evolved, but here's the uncomfortable truth: we're not. We've just gotten better at disguising our collective delusion with fancy words like progress and innovation. The crowd has always been drunk on its own certainty, and that's where the real danger lives. Gustave Le Bon figured this out over a century ago when he showed us how groups of intelligent individuals can form a collective that's dumber than its dumbest member. When people gather in masses, something primal takes over. Reason gets drowned out by emotion, and suddenly everyone's thinking with the same brain. Ortega y Gasset called it the rebellion of the masses, and he wasn't being dramatic. He was watching supposedly civilized people abandon everything that made civilization possible, because herd mentality feels safer than standing alone. False prophets thrive in this environment because they don't need to convince everyone individually. They just need to capture the momentum of the crowd. Here's what keeps me up at night, though. We're not just repeating history, we're accelerating it. The mechanisms of mass manipulation that took decades to build in ancient Rome now get constructed in months through digital worship and algorithmic echo chambers. We've created systems that can identify our deepest insecurities and feed them back to us disguised as truth, and we're paying for the privilege. The question isn't whether we're worshiping false gods anymore. It's whether we're even capable of recognizing them when they appear on our feeds with millions of followers and blue check marks. And that brings us to something even more disturbing. You want to know why political leaders feel more like cult leaders these days? Because they are. They figured out something Machiavelli wrote about 500 years ago. People don't want complexity, they want certainty. They don't want nuance, they want someone to blame. And most importantly, they don't want freedom, they want someone to follow who makes them feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. The true believer isn't born, he's manufactured through a careful manipulation of hope and fear, and modern politics has turned this into an assembly line. We're not electing representatives anymore. We're crowning saviors, and then we're shocked when they act like gods who can't be questioned. The script is so predictable it's almost boring, except for the fact that millions fall for it every single cycle. Step 1. Identify a group that feels forgotten or threatened. Step 2. Tell them their problems aren't their responsibility. There's an enemy, an other, a scapegoat that's stolen what's rightfully theirs. Step 3. Position yourself as the only one brave enough to fight for them. Hannah Arendt documented how totalitarian movements use this exact playbook, but here's the twist. You don't need jackboots and secret police anymore. You just need a sophisticated enough understanding of cognitive dissonance and a population suffering from intellectual laziness. Give people permission to hate. Wrap it in the language of justice or patriotism or whatever tribal identity they're clinging to, and watch manufactured consent build itself. What's truly brilliant, in a dark sort of way, is how they've learned to weaponize our need for meaning against us. Eric Hoffer saw this coming. He understood that true believers don't join movements because they've carefully analyzed the evidence and concluded it's the right path. They join because they're running from themselves, from uncertainty, from the terrible burden of having to think independently. Political theater works because it offers a story where you're always the hero, your side is always right, and any information that contradicts this narrative must be fake, biased, or part of some conspiracy. The leaders don't even need to be particularly competent anymore. They just need to be confident enough to never admit doubt, because doubt is what people are desperately trying to escape. And here's where it gets really insidious. The system doesn't just create followers, it punishes independent thought. Try questioning your side's narrative in any echo chamber, left or right, and watch how fast you get labeled a traitor. Noam Chomsky spent decades showing us how consent gets manufactured not through obvious propaganda, but through subtle framing, strategic omissions, and the illusion of debate between narrow boundaries. We think we're having important conversations, but we're really just rearranging deck chairs on a ship that's already sinking. The real power isn't in the politicians themselves. It's in the systems that have convinced us we need them to think for us. But at least political false prophets are human, flawed, eventually mortal. The next type of idol we've created? It never sleeps, never dies, and knows you better than you know yourself. Let's talk about the God you carry in your pocket. The one you check first thing in the morning and last thing at night. The one that knows your fears, your desires, your secrets, your weaknesses better than any priest or therapist ever could. The algorithm isn't just recommending content. It's shaping reality itself, deciding what you see, what you think about, who you become. And here's the kicker. You asked for this. We all did. We traded our autonomy for convenience, our privacy for connection, our ability to think independently for the comfort of never having to decide what to pay attention to. Neil Postman warned us that we'd amuse ourselves to death, but even he couldn't have predicted we'd do it while calling it staying informed and being connected. The truly terrifying part isn't that the technology exists, it's how willingly we've surrendered to it. Byung-Chul Han talks about this in ways that should make your skin crawl. We're not being oppressed by some external force. We're exploiting ourselves, competing to be more productive, more connected, more optimized. Digital worship isn't something being forced on us. It's something we're doing to ourselves because the alternative, facing silence, boredom, our own thoughts, has become unbearable. Every notification is a little hit of dopamine. Every like is validation. Every scroll is an escape from having to sit with who we actually are. The algorithm doesn't control you through chains. It controls you by knowing exactly what you'll click next, and it's right 99 times out of 100. Sherry Tuckle spent years documenting what we lost in this trade. We're alone together, surrounded by connection, but starved for actual contact. We've got 1,000 friends online and no one to call at 3 in the morning. We've got infinite information and no wisdom. We've got technological dependency so deep that suggesting someone delete their social media feels like asking them to cut off a limb. False prophets used to need charisma, but now they just need to game the algorithm. Truth isn't what's accurate anymore. It's what goes viral. And we're so deep in this mass psychosis that we can't even see it as a problem. We think the phone is a tool, but Jaron Lanier's been screaming that the tool is using us, modifying our behavior, and we're too addicted to the dopamine drip to care. But here's what really keeps this system running. It's given us exactly what we wanted, a world where we never have to be wrong, never have to encounter ideas that make us uncomfortable, never have to grow. The echo chambers aren't a bug, they're a feature. The algorithm learns what makes you feel good, what confirms your existing beliefs, what keeps you engaged, and then it feeds you more of exactly that until you're living in a personalized reality that shares almost nothing with the person sitting next to you. Critical thinking can't survive in this environment because it requires exposure to ideas you disagree with, uncertainty you can't immediately resolve, complexity you can't reduce to a hot take. We've built a digital cage and decorated it so beautifully that we think we're free. And while we're worshiping these digital prophets, the institutions we thought would save us have been rotting from the inside. Remember when you could trust something? When there were institutions, churches, universities, scientific bodies that actually stood for something beyond their own survival and expansion. Yeah, me too. That memory is getting hazier every year, and there's a reason for that. Nietzsche said God is dead and we killed him, but he left out the part where we turned everything else into a cheap substitute. Religion became a business, education became indoctrination, science became scientism, and we're standing here wondering why nothing feels solid anymore. The institutional decay isn't happening to us. We're actively participating in it, cheering it on, buying tickets to the show. Guy Debord called it the society of the spectacle, and he nailed it decades before Instagram existed. Everything that was once lived directly has moved into representation, into performance, into bullshit. Churches don't shepherd souls. They build mega complexes and worry about their brand. Universities don't educate, they credential. Ivan Illich saw this coming. How we mistake schooling for learning. How we create systems that teach people to consume education rather than generate wisdom. And science? Don't even get me started. It's been hijacked by funding mechanisms, political agendas, and career incentives that punish anyone who dares to question the consensus. We're not following the scientific method anymore. We're following whoever screams, "Trust the science," the loudest, while simultaneously making it impossible to actually examine the data. Christopher Lasch documented the culture of narcissism that made all this possible. We became so obsessed with ourselves, with our feelings, with our personal brand, that we stopped asking whether these institutions were serving anything beyond themselves. Religion promised salvation, but delivered judgment and guilt-tripping. Education promised enlightenment, but delivered debt and conformity. Science promised truth, but delivered certainty without humility. And we kept showing up, kept paying, kept believing because the alternative, that we're on our own, that there's no authority figure to trust, that we have to think for ourselves, is too terrifying to consider. The blind faith didn't die when we killed God. It just got redistributed to institutions that were even less worthy of it. What really gets me is how these corrupted institutions feed off each other, creating a closed loop of manufactured legitimacy. The media quotes the experts cite the studies funded by corporations, the corporations hire the politicians appoint the regulators, and round we go. Everyone's got credentials, everyone's got authority, and nobody's got accountability. We're drowning in official sources and starving for actual truth. And when you point this out, when you dare to question whether these sacred cows might be dying on their feet, you get labeled a conspiracy theorist, an extremist, dangerous. Because the one thing these institutions excel at is protecting themselves from scrutiny. But why do we let them? Why do we keep defending the very systems that are failing us? That's the question that leads us somewhere even darker. Here's the part that'll really mess with your head. Most people prefer their chains. They'll defend them, polish them, show them off on social media with the caption blessed. Etienne de la Boétie figured this out in the 16th century, and it's only gotten worse since then. Voluntary servitude isn't something forced on people. It's something they choose, sometimes fight for, because freedom is exhausting and uncertainty is terrifying. Give someone the choice between comfortable slavery and dangerous freedom, and you'll be shocked how many pick the chains. Not because they're stupid, but because they're human, and humans will trade almost anything for the feeling of security, even when that security is obviously an illusion. Eric spent years unpacking why we fear freedom more than we fear oppression. It's simple, really. Freedom means responsibility, and responsibility means you can't blame anyone else when things go wrong. It means sitting with uncertainty, making choices without guarantees, accepting that you might be wrong. That's psychological weight most people never learn to carry. So instead, they outsource their thinking to whatever authority figure promises certainty. The herd mentality isn't forced on us. We run toward it because being part of the crowd means never having to stand alone. Aldous Huxley understood this better than almost anyone. In his dystopia, people aren't oppressed, they're tranquilized, distracted, kept happy enough to never question why they're not free. Sound familiar? Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor spelled it out with brutal clarity. Given the choice between freedom and bread, between responsibility and security, between truth and comfort, the vast majority will choose comfort every single time. They don't want to be free, they want to be fed. They don't want to think, they want to be told what's true. They don't want sovereignty over their own lives, they want someone else to carry that burden for them. And once you understand this, once you really internalize that most people are actively choosing their own mental slavery, everything else makes sense. The collective delusion isn't something imposed from above. It's something we're building together, one comfortable choice at a time, one cognitive dissonance we refuse to examine at a time. The system doesn't need to break you anymore. It just needs to make submission attractive enough. Give people streaming services so they never get bored, social media, so they never feel alone, food delivery, so they never have to plan, AI assistants, so they never have to remember anything, and algorithms, so they never have to decide what to think about. Make every convenience come at the cost of a little autonomy, and soon you've got a population that's technically free but functionally enslaved. And the brilliant part? They'll call it progress. They'll say anyone questioning this trajectory is trying to turn back the clock, afraid of change, stuck in the past. But you can't turn back the clock when you never learned to tell time in the first place. And speaking of time, we're running out of it to have these conversations because truth itself has become the most dangerous contraband. Truth has become radioactive, not because it's dangerous to the system, though it is, but because it's dangerous to the individual psychology of everyone who's invested in the lies. Alexander Solzhenitsyn survived the Gulag and came out telling us that the simplest act of resistance is to live not by lies, but he was talking to people who knew they were living in a totalitarian state. What happens when the lies are so embedded, so comfortable, so validated by everyone around you that they don't even register as lies anymore? What happens when telling the truth doesn't make you a hero? It makes you a pariah, a troublemaker, someone who ruins the party by bringing up things we'd all rather ignore. George Orwell gave us the blueprint, but we read it as a warning instead of an instruction manual. The Ministry of Truth isn't some far-off dystopian fantasy. It's the carefully curated narrative we're all participating in, where certain facts become unspeakable not because they're false, but because they're inconvenient. Václav Havel understood this better than most. The power of the powerless comes from refusing to participate in the lie, but that refusal costs you everything. Your job, your reputation, your friends, your peace of mind. In an empire of lies, truth-telling isn't noble, it's social suicide. And we've all seen what happens to people who break the consensus, who ask the wrong questions, who notice patterns we're all supposed to pretend don't exist. They get deplatformed, demonetized, diagnosed, dismissed. Theodore Dalrymple made this point brilliantly. The purpose of propaganda isn't to convince you of anything. It's to humiliate you, to force you to repeat obvious lies, to break your spirit through participation in your own degradation. When everyone around you is saying 2 + 2 = 5, and you can see it's 4, but you stay silent anyway because speaking up will cost you everything, that's when they've won. Not by changing your mind, but by teaching you that your mind doesn't matter. The manufactured consent isn't about getting your genuine agreement. It's about getting your compliance through exhaustion, through the calculation that the price of truth is just too high. And most people, when faced with that calculation, will choose silence. They'll choose comfort. They'll choose survival. But here's what makes this moment in history different from all the others. We've got infinite information and zero wisdom. We've got more access to truth than any generation in human history, and we're less capable of recognizing it than medieval peasants. Because truth doesn't trend, lies do. Truth doesn't make you feel good, lies do. Truth demands something from you: growth, change, discomfort, responsibility, while lies let you stay exactly who you are. The awakening consciousness that's happening in pockets, in individuals, in moments of clarity, it's not happening because truth got easier to find. It's happening because some people are finally realizing that the comfort of lies costs more than the pain of truth. But that realization, that's the loneliest journey you'll ever take. So here we are. You've seen through the idolatry, recognized the manipulation, felt the weight of choosing consciousness in a world that rewards sleep. Now what? Marcus Aurelius had to run an empire while staying true to philosophy. And his answer was simple but brutal. Focus on what's in your control and accept what isn't. Your awakening consciousness doesn't give you the power to wake everyone else up. It doesn't make you a chosen one or a prophet or anything special except alone. Because that's what Kierkegaard tried to tell us. The crowd is a lie, and standing apart from it means standing by yourself. You can't save everyone. You probably can't save anyone. You can only save yourself, and even that's a full-time job. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz and came out understanding something most people never learn. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. When collective madness is the water everyone's swimming in, your individual awakening doesn't change the ocean. It just means you're the only one who notices you're drowning. But here's the thing. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Once you've tasted freedom of thought, even for a moment, the chains of tribal thinking become visible. And you've got a choice to make every single day. Do you put the chains back on because it's easier, or do you carry the weight of consciousness because it's true? Neither answer is wrong. One just costs your peace, and the other costs your soul. Carl Jung spent his life mapping the human psyche and kept coming back to the same conclusion. Most people would rather be whole than good, rather be comfortable than conscious, rather merge with the collective than stand as individuals. The modern world didn't create this tendency. It just amplified it, weaponized it, turned it into a machine that runs on our willingness to not think too hard about what we're participating in. Your rebellion isn't going to look like a revolution. It's going to look like reading instead of scrolling, thinking instead of reacting, choosing discomfort over distraction, asking questions instead of accepting answers. And nobody's going to congratulate you for this. Nobody's going to notice. It's the narrowest path there is because you're walking it alone. But here's what they don't tell you about the narrow path. It gets easier. Not because the weight gets lighter, but because you get stronger. Every day, you choose consciousness over conformity. Every moment, you resist the pull of the herd. Every time you sit with truth instead of comfort, you're building something that can't be taken from you. The mass psychosis around you will continue. The false prophets will keep preaching. The algorithms will keep learning. The institutions will keep decaying. And you'll keep walking one step at a time on a path most people will never even see. Not because you're better than them, but because you finally decided that living a conscious life in an unconscious world is worth whatever it costs. And brother, it's going to cost you everything. But what you get in return, that's what we need to talk about next. So here we are at the end of this journey, but really at the beginning of yours. Everything I've laid out isn't just information to consume and forget. It's a mirror being held up to your life right now. The question isn't whether modern idolatry exists or whether we're living through collective madness. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to close this video, scroll to the next distraction, and pretend you didn't see what you just saw? Or are you going to make the harder choice? The choice to stay conscious in a world that rewards sleep? Here's what I want you to understand. You can't save everyone. You can't wake up the masses. You can't fix the system. But you can save yourself. You can wake yourself up. You can refuse to participate in your own mental enslavement. Starting today, starting right now, you can choose differently. Put down the phone when the urge to scroll hits. Question the narrative everyone's repeating. Sit with discomfort instead of medicating it with content. Read books that challenge you. Have conversations that don't fit in echo chambers. Stand alone if you have to, because standing alone in truth is better than marching together toward a cliff. The narrow path isn't glamorous. Nobody's going to throw you a parade for choosing consciousness over conformity. But every single day you walk it, you become someone the chaos can't touch, the manipulation can't reach, the madness can't claim. And here's the thing about individual awakening. It spreads quietly, slowly, person by person. You're not alone in this. There are others walking this path, asking the same questions, refusing the same comfortable lies. We're building something here, a community of people who value truth over validation, wisdom over information, freedom over comfort. If this video challenged you, provoked you, or opened your eyes to something you hadn't seen before, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell. Leave a comment telling me which part hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the algorithm isn't going to promote content that tells people to think for themselves. We have to do that ourselves. Every subscription, every like, every share is a vote for more content like this, for more truth-telling in an empire of lies. And if you've made it this far, if you're still here, you're already on the path. Now, let's walk it together. I'll see you in the next one.